As far as actors go, Bob Crane had it made in the 60s. The role of Colonel Robert Hogan, the astute commander in the popular sitcom Hogan's Heroes, was a wonderful fit for his charming personality and sharp sense of humor. Even when he wasn't acting, his warm nature and biting sense of humor made him a captivating presence. His life was falling apart in ways nobody could have predicted, even though the public saw him as the charming TV star behind the scenes. Betrayal, controversy, and a horrible death would shatter what had started as a comedic career, leaving behind more questions than answers. A star's ascent to fame, Bob Crane became well known on the Los Angeles radio scene before becoming a television star. He was the host of a famous morning show on KNX and was known as the man of 1,000 voices. Guests on the show included Charlton Heston, Marilyn Monroe, and Bob Hope. The A-listers in Hollywood loved him for his effortless charisma and lightning-fast improvisational skills. Walt Disney himself allegedly proclaimed him the West's quickest wit. Soon after achieving fame on the radio, he began acting. During an appearance on Crane's radio show in 1961, the renowned TV writer Carl Reiner extended an opportunity for Crane to portray a cheating spouse on The Dick Van Dyke Show. A regular position as a carefree dentist on the Donna Reed Show was one of several opportunities brought up by that one performance. In 1965, Crane's agency forwarded him the Hogan's Heroes script, which was a new TV show. He mistook it for a military drama at first, but then he realized it was actually a comedy about Allied POWs who were able to outwit their clumsy German captors throughout the conflict. A huge success was had by Hogan's Heroes despite the strange premise. Crane became famous for his role as Colonel Robert Hogan. He became one of the most famous faces in television over the 6 seasons of the show, which aired from 1965 to 1971 and garnered him 2 Emmy nods. All around the nation, you could see his likeness on billboards, lunchboxes, and periodicals. Millions of people looked up to him as the witty, smiling leader who was never short on strategy. Crane seemed to be living it up on screen. Even when he was at the pinnacle of his career, his friends and family noticed a shift. His private life became increasingly unstable, his need for thrill intensified, and his actions away from the camera suggested an obsession that would eventually engulf him. At least for the time being, though, the world could only see the mirth and the hidden double existence. Hidden beneath the charisma and charismatic smile that propelled Bob Crane to stardom, an entirely different story was playing out. His fascination with photography started to evolve into something more intimate around the middle of the 1960s. At first, all he wanted to do was play around with different cameras, take pictures, and see how different pieces of video gear worked. But as time went on, taking pictures became more than just a pastime. A crucial element of his inner life, it eventually became. The turning point occurred when his co-star Richard Dawson from Hogan's Heroes introduced him to John Henry Carpenter, a salesperson for Sony Electronics video equipment. Crane was able to gain access to cutting-edge technologies because to Carpenter's extensive Hollywood network. Due to their common interest in audio gear, the two rapidly became friends. Carpenter went so far as to assist him in setting up devices in hotels while they were traveling. What began as an inquisitive friendship soon turned into actions that concerned Crane's closest associates. They started going out to clubs and pubs together, where Crane's fame brought a lot of attention. The two grew inseparable, spending endless hours together exploring new devices, and he frequently introduced Carpenter as his boss. Some thought it was harmless fun, while others were worried about Crane's apparent reliance on his camera. His coworkers saw that he was losing focus, lost in his pastime, rather than returning to the career that had defined him earlier. His personal life was affected by the strain. His 3 children's mother, Ann Tertzian, whom he had a romantic relationship with in high school, was his ex-wife after more than 20 years of marriage. The same problems followed him after he wed Patricia Olson, who viewers of Hogan's Heroes would recognize as Sigrid Valdis. Supposedly, Crane's reputation took a hit even when shooting Disney's 1973 family film Super Dad due to reports that his conduct off-set had worried producers. When the 1970s came to a close, Crane had lost much of his luster as a television star. Stage shows provided him with consistent work, and he appeared intent on reviving his career. Meanwhile, things were getting heated between him and Carpenter, who he had been friendly with. Friends learned of Crane's desire to move on, break free from old routines, and begin again. Unfortunately, by summer 1978, the opportunity was past, an Arizona murder mystery. If you wanted to catch Bob Crane in a stage comedy, Beginner's Luck, at Scottsdale, Arizona's Windmill Dinner Theater, you had to go by June 1978. Despite being 49 years old and only 2 weeks away from turning 50, he appeared hell-bent on making a U-turn. His colleagues recalled that he had mentioned severing his association with John Carpenter and divorcing Patricia Olson at a later date. He wished to start over. However, a terrible and unexpected end to his life occurred before he could do that. Victoria Ann Barry, Crane's co-star, went to see him in the afternoon of June 29th after he didn't show up for a lunch meeting. She discovered a scene that would plague Hollywood for decades inside his flat at Winfield Place. In his bed, Crane was found lifeless. Authorities are looking into the possibility that a camera tripod was the object used to inflict the severe head injuries. Near him, authorities discovered an electrical cord. However, it was determined that it was not the cause of death. The lack of activity in the room was the most unsettling aspect for the detectives. There were no indications of break-ins or thefts. Those accountable. Maybe someone broke in while he was sleeping, or maybe it was someone Crane trusted enough to let inside. John Carpenter was swiftly identified by that small group of suspects. He had traveled to Phoenix a few days before to visit Crane. The two reportedly saw private tapes together after dinner the night before. Carpenter asserted that he thereafter went back to his own hotel, although eyewitnesses have cast doubt on his chronology. And more aspect of Crane's private life was exposed at the crime scene. The public was surprised when police discovered cameras, tripods, cassettes, and cables scattered throughout the residence. The popular actor from Hogan's Heroes was unexpectedly portrayed in the media as a man dealing with personal issues. The finding had a catastrophic effect on his family. To the detectives, it served as both a lead and a diversion. Despite the equipment's ability to link Crane's private life to Carpenter, the sensational nature of the information made uncovering the truth more challenging. But from the get-go, it was obvious that this was no haphazard break-in. On a personal level, the inquiry and the trial. In 1978, the Scottsdale Police Department lacked the necessary preparation to deal with a significant case. Errors at the scene of the crime would plague investigators for decades, and they lacked a dedicated homicide branch. Despite the irregular handling of evidence, detectives were able to obtain photographs, videotapes, and recording devices from Crane's flat. The situation was further complicated when friends, family, and even Crane's eldest son Robert were permitted to access the flat before it was fully sealed. They left behind fingerprints, hair, and footprints. Still, John Carpenter was the target of suspicion despite all these problems. He had stayed in the area, spent time with Crane the night prior, and there were smears of blood in his rental car that matched Crane's type. Blood typing was insufficient evidence of guilt at the time, and DNA testing was still in its infancy. The district attorney of Maricopa County decided not to press charges because neither fingerprints nor a weapon were found. Carpenter went back to Los Angeles, but the damage to his reputation was too great. Nothing was heard about the case for over a decade. The files were subsequently reopened in 1990 by detectives Jim Raines and Barry Vassell. They felt renewed optimism because of recent developments in DNA testing. Upon reviewing the evidence, they came upon a vintage photograph of the inside of Carpenter's vehicle that seemed to depict a piece of biological material. Despite the loss of the original samples, the finding allowed prosecutors to proceed with the case. John Carpenter was officially charged with Crane's murder in 1992. After his arrest, the 1994 trial unfolded much like a courtroom drama. The state contended that Carpenter's violent outburst stemmed from his resentment at Crane's choice to sever their friendship. Blood samples, the men's past interactions, and Scotty Crane's testimony, in which he stated that his father had often discussed severing ties with Carpenter, were all submitted. In their defense, the attorneys cast doubt on the credibility of the witnesses and the evidence. Not only was the crime scene badly preserved, but they also brought attention to the fact that the crucial biological sample was absent, rendering the tripod theory purely conjectural. Additionally, they hinted to the presence of additional suspects, including individuals who might have harbored animosity towards Crane. The jury remained unconvinced despite weeks of testimony. The acquittal of John Carpenter occurred in 1994. Up to his death in 1998, he insisted he was innocent. The official record shows that the case went back into the cold files without a resolution or completion. A scandalous past and a family's ongoing battle. There was no relief for Bob Crane's kids from the trial, as his father's life's most intimate details became a public spectacle. His oldest son Robert spoke of the anguish he felt. Testimony and evidence abounding in the courtroom diverted focus from Crane's extensive career in radio and television. His loved ones were left feeling saddened and bewildered by the trial, which did not provide any answers. Another of his sons, Robert David Crane, later discussed his belief that Sigrid Valdis, who played Patricia Olson, Crane's second wife, may have had a more substantial role in what happened. He pointed out that Bob bequeathed his whole estate to Olson in his will, except from his offspring and first wife. Robert David claimed that everyone else had lost out, save for one individual. Although Olson was never seriously regarded as a suspect by the prosecution, the family's grief was exacerbated by the rumor. The portrayal of Crane's father was difficult for Scotty, who was also his son. He insisted that everyone who was on the tapes was giving their informed consent, but that the media hardly ever gave any context. Despite his groundbreaking work as a radio presenter and an Emmy-nominated actor, Crane was portrayed in the headlines as a fading celebrity engulfed in scandal. His story's darker elements overshadowed his theater and movie accomplishments. The outpouring of love for Crane at his funeral in July 1978 was evident throughout Hollywood. Approximately 200 people paid their respects in Los Angeles's St. Paul the Apostle Church. Among them were famous faces like Patty Duke, Carol O'Connor, and John Astin. The actors who played him on Hogan's Heroes carried his coffin. However, Hollywood appeared to subtly withdraw in the years that ensued. There was a turndown for Hogan's Heroes reruns. Rather than being praised for his talent, Crane's name was typically mumbled in reference to controversy. This wound hurt more than any other for his loved ones. They knew a man who was multi-faceted and imperfect, yet also kind, humorous, and talented. His accomplishments were overshadowed by the mystery surrounding him, and he will never be known for the happiness he offered to so many others. Evolutionary genetics, the Hollywood legacy, and the last catastrophe. Scottsdale police and Maricopa County prosecutors kept looking into Bob Crane's case even after John Carpenter was cleared in 1994. There was optimism that DNA could succeed where forensic methods of the 1970s had failed because to the advancements in technology. John Hook, a television reporter from Phoenix, was granted access to examine the remaining blood samples that were taken from the rental car of Carpenter in 2016. 2 male DNA sequences were discovered by analysts using contemporary techniques. One belonged to a man who remained anonymous, while the other was in such a state of disrepair that it could not be determined. Importantly, the tests used up all the remaining material, so we couldn't do any more analysis. The matter went back into limbo. For Crane's remaining relatives, this was a disappointing outcome. The 2015 publication of Robert's Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder by his son acknowledged that closure would never be achieved. He said, "It was like being in a perpetual fog, dealing with the loss of his father." At the same time, Scotty fought back against how his father was portrayed in media. Scotty claimed that the 2002 movie Autofocus portrayed Crane inaccurately because it was too dramatic and overblown. He went so far as to launch BobCrane.com, an online repository for materials that, in his opinion, painted a more complete and fair picture of his father's life. Still, Crane's reputation took a hit. His name is almost always accompanied with controversy whenever he is mentioned in Hollywood. Whenever his unresolved case is brought up, Hogan's Heroes, his magnum opus, is nearly always mentioned alongside it. Now that the star's identity is a mystery, the once groundbreaking show is in the background. In popular memory, Crane is more often associated with an unresolved plot than with his talents as an improviser or a charming criminal. The manner of his death and the way he is remembered are both tragic. For decades, Bob Crane was the national hero for his ability to make people laugh, find humor in the unlikeliest of places, and win over audiences nationwide. But the disclosures that followed a single night in Scottsdale altered the course of his entire legacy. His final chapter was marked by betrayal and sorrow rather than success. His case is still unsolved, and his memory is still uncertain. Among the most tragic Hollywood stories is that of Bob Crane. The unsolved crime and mysteries that plagued the man who brought laughter to millions of people's faces brought him down. Despite their best efforts, his family is still trying to piece together what happened. Even after all these years, your best guess as to what transpired that night in 1978 in Scottsdale. Feel free to leave a comment with your opinions and like and subscribe to Untold Hollywood Stories if you enjoyed this.